Well, let's stay with Mosul now. And General Mark Kimmitt is the former senior officer of the U.S. Army Central Command and has also served as former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State. He joins me now live in the studio. Thanks so much for joining us again. Well, let's come straight off the back of what we last reported, this message from Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Assuming it's him, what do you think it indicates? The timing, and how strongly do you think his so-called troops will respond?
Well, I think he has basically said that these troops are supposed to die in place inside Mosul. No retreat, no surrender.
And what does that mean for the Iraqi troops trying to defeat Daesh?
Well, it means it's going to be a tough fight, but they've always anticipated it. That's why they've sent their best forces inside Mosul. The counterterrorism service, these are the most well-trained, well-equipped, bravest soldiers that the Iraqis have.
To quote this recording directly, he said, "Holding your ground in honor is 1,000 times better than retreating in disgrace." But give me a better idea then of just the numbers of Daesh fighters in Mosul. They estimate some 5,000. Is that the core mass of Daesh fighters, in the sense that if they're defeated in Mosul, where does that leave the wider organization?
Well, that's the largest number that has been said by our intelligence services. Normally they say about 2,000 to 3,000, but that's only inside of Iraq. There's still a significant number inside of Syria, so it's still a long fight before the caliphate is destroyed.
Okay, so what next then? Once, if, I should say, Mosul is indeed recaptured by these Iraqi forces, is the aftermath nothing but celebration, or is there a lot more violence to come? Well,
in Syria, as you said earlier, Secretary Carter and the Turkish government have agreed on some role for the Turks inside the retaking of Raqqa. You have to take both Raqqa and Mosul and bring both sides up to the border before the caliphate is destroyed. And once the caliphate is destroyed, it's an entirely different ballgame for ISIS at that point.
What is that ballgame? I mean, are we just going to see, after what seemed to be the defeat of al-Qaeda, you know, this other head just spun out of this monster and became ISIS? Can something similar happen in the aftermath of Daesh defeat?
I think it will, but Daesh is not defeated. The caliphate is destroyed. Okay. Now, the caliphate was their ideological base, which differed from al-Qaeda. But I think that simply means that we're going to see ISIS not simply in Iraq and Syria, the remnants in Iraq and Syria, but I think they're going to now turn their venom and turn their eyes towards other locations, not necessarily to set up a caliphate, but certainly for terrorist operations, as we've seen in Brussels, as we've seen in Cannes, as we've seen in other cities around the world.
But for as long as Daesh exists in Iraq and Syria, do you think it will at least help keep Iraqi forces united and serving in one mission?
Well, I certainly hope so. The Iraqi elements that are fighting inside, some are the Iraqi forces answerable to Baghdad, others are answerable to other countries and other organizations. I think once the majority of fighting is over in both Mosul and the Nineveh province, there's going to be a reckoning among those groups, and I think the fighting will no longer be united, but it could be against each other.
And as we know, the equation is also being slightly complicated by Turkey protecting its interests in the region, something that the Iraqi government has not responded well to. In fact, we heard from the Iraqi government today that they will consider Turkey an enemy and will deal with it as an enemy should it become involved in ground force invasion. Where does that leave Turkey's options?
Well, I think the options that Turkey has is to continue to protect the border area, continue to protect perhaps a couple of kilometers inside the border. But any notion of Turkey conducting a ground invasion in Iraq the way they have inside of Syria, I think is beyond the pale. I don't think Turkey would intend to do that, and there really seems to be no reason to do that.
And you think some of this exchange between Turkish officials and, well, particularly the words of Iraqi officials, is a lot more bark than
well, again, it's dependent on the actions of Turkey, but I think at this point Turkey will take a moderate view on how to move forward. They have expressed some concerns about whether, if the Iranian-backed Shia militia go into Tel Afar, which is a Turkmen city. But I think, by and large, both sides, cooler heads are going to prevail in private than they are in public.
Okay, let's hope so. General Mark Kimmitt, thanks so much for joining us, as always.